wanted to come down, but he couldn't make it.
Is that the artist?
Yeah, oh my God, he's a riot.
Yeah.
He's amazing.
Yeah. He's a very highly intelligent person, very well read, very centric. Worse than me.
Yeah. What's his name?
John Kutzer. But he's really interesting to talk to, but you know, his art is just, wow. I've never seen anybody draw like this. Just
cool.
Whatever I describe, he's able to put it on paper.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. It's almost like he's seeing in my head. I just barely describe things. It's just, it's a good synergy going.
When is the book out?
Black Friday.
This Black Friday.
It's big. I think we're going to start in Friendly Neighborhood Comics.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
In Bellingham. We got 25 stores lined up in Massachusetts.
Nice.
So we'll start there, then hit another state, and another state.
It's kind of gross.
Then we're going to get it translated into different languages.
Yeah.
And then we'll go to those countries where it's translated into and do some touring, signing, and promotions.
So that's pretty cool. So
it's a lot of legwork.
Oh yeah.
That's what happens. So I'm like self-publishing. That way I control everything.
Right. Yeah. And there's benefits and
there's benefits, but the tough thing is you have to call like Inebri and the CEO level and get things done. You know what I'm saying? Like, but it's worth it in the long run.
Have you brought it to Diamond yet?
No, I'm not doing anything until once we get published.
So yeah.
And then we start as we're touring. Then we'll be like, hey, look, we're doing all these sales with this. This is really growing. It's big. You can research it. We'll have a website up by that point, and then go from there. So I won't get like in Barnes and Nobles, places like that.
Cool.
It's a small work. You do it yourself.
Oh, yep. It's easy everywhere to do it, right?
Yeah. As if writing isn't hard enough.
So we're here again at the Craft Beer Cellar with.
We're recording?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we don't. We just kind of roll in. We're very casual about it.
I'm trying to remember if I said anything.
I don't think you said anything bad. No.
You can edit, right?
Sure. No, we didn't say anything bad.
Oh, that's a sneak attack here. I'm being recorded.
No. We just kind of roll into it.
It's all good.
We haven't had anyone say anything horrible yet.
I was talking about a certain book company. Hopefully they get something.
Yeah. Yeah, we won't put anything in there that's going to void your contract or anything. So we're here at the Craft Beer Cellar again in Plymouth, Mass, with Brian Hall, who is an author and has recently just finished writing his book. And what is the title of your book, sir?
You're talking about the one I just published, or the one
the one that you said's coming up Black Friday.
Okay, that would be the Lightstones, the legendary Kingdoms of Attera.
And so, like a rough synopsis, what's it about?
Well, the synopsis, I think took me longer than to write than the actual book, because it's very multi-layered and everything. But in simple, if it follows along, the whole premises of good versus evil. It's a fantasy-based book, and you have a lot of different elements that are similar to, like, if you've read Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, which most people are familiar with, or Ari Salvatore, who done like the Icewind Dale trilogy, which these are the books and stuff that influenced me as a kid growing up and made me want to write.
So it's kind of a swords and sorcery type of thing?
Yeah, kind of a swords and sorcery, Dragon Slayer / type of thing. But I took a new twist on it, and because you don't want to keep recreating the wheel. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing, if you're writing fantasy, to write good fantasy, you can't just always come up with abstract places and creatures and beings. And what I mean by abstract is that something that you've never seen before, because as a human, you won't be able to relate to it.
Right.
So it kind of becomes distant. And that's where a lot of fantasy and sci-fi fails, is where people can't relate to it. And if you think about, like, if you read Lord of the Rings, one thing I liked about Tolkien's work is that, he's introducing new things into your imagination, but it always has hints of something similar, something you can relate to, and that's what pulls you into the book. So that's one thing I've really worked hard on getting into these books, with the characters.
He did such a good job with that, to the point where everyone's convinced it's a parable.
Yeah. Well, it kind of is. I mean, he was a devout Christian, and it's kind of like a parable of the Bible, but also Tolkien, he wanted really to write a fantasy world that was actually the myth of England.
Right,
Because England,
right, yeah.
England didn't have any, like, you have all these cultures that have very recognizable, this is the myth from this culture, this is the mythological story. England didn't really have anything that was, because, I mean, the Brits were, and you have the Celtic influence, and you have the Pictish, and all these Germanic influences, but, and all those have different cultures and legends and stuff, but Tolkien's idea was to create a mythology for Great Britain.
Right,
I think
but
he succeeded.
A lot of people think it's just a take on World War II and things like that.
Well, there was elements of that.
There is, but he was very adamant that
he fought.
wasn't.
He fought in World War
II, but he was very adamant that
no, it was actually World War One.
I'm sorry, World War One.
Yeah,
but he was adamant that it wasn't a retelling.
Well,
of that.
he
But
really.
It's hard not to kind of relate your.
Well, here's the thing. Like what he said was he didn't want it to be direct allegories.
Yeah.
From the Bible or the war or anything, but what he did want it to do was to have ideas from these and like shadows of them without really being like I guess what you would say purposely allegorical. To where
Right.
It's so obvious when you're reading it, and that's kind of like what I've done with my books. And because, what makes good fantasy is what makes good fantasy. If it's written 60 years ago or 60 years in the future, if you really try to push an allegory or a certain metaphor, sometimes it comes across as being campy or cheap.
Right.
Or like it feels like it's, nothing original and stuff like that. So I've worked hard not to do that in Attera. And one thing interesting about this, I actually started writing the backdrop because I created this fantasy world from scratch.
Yeah.
That means every civilization, every
all the
culture.
world building that takes a long time.
It's a world building actually, and it's creating. It's like taking Earth.
Yeah.
Think of all the cultures and languages, and I've tried to make Attera as vast as our own Earth. And what I did is actually I've changed names and stuff, but I've used what I've experienced from different cultures. I speak a few different languages. Studied martial arts many years. I've studied theology and mythology since. I actually started reading mythology books in the 3rd grade. I could name every Greek and Roman god at that point, which is kind of crazy. But I guess you have to be a little eccentric to do something. But and I took all of that and put that into a my own creative fantasy world. And I started working on that in high school. So I've actually been working on the frame building of this for about 25 years. If you really think, that's a long time to be working on anything.
Yeah.
And I just, the framework built, and as I grew as a person, it grew. As I evolved, it evolved. As I had life experiences, I went back and put them into the book. And, of course, I didn't want it to be like, my word retrieval isn't working well right now. And that always happens.
I've been doing that all day.
Yeah, I think it's too much allergies, but I didn't want it to be too combobulated.
Yeah.
I mean, like just too much information, too many different ideas, and so because here's the thing: you want a story to be complex enough, and the world complex enough, where your most intelligent readers will not be bored.
Right.
It will challenge their thinking, but you also want to hit, which is what I would say the mainstream. Most people picking, the intelligent readers are a small minority, I think. Wouldn't you agree with that, probably?
I think intelligent people in general.
I don't want to go far and say that, but well, there is a IQ span across the human genome. We do know that, but what I'm saying is most general people, intelligent or dull as a 2x4.
Yeah.
Sometimes, I think. What's really going to sell to the main? And I'm not writing this.
The way to look at it is there's the average intelligence. Half of the people are.
So you want to be able for them to pick it up and not want to think too hard and not get it, because as an intelligent geek, when we read something, like speaking of me and you, Andy, because I know you very well, when we read something, we rip it apart. We think about it sideways, backwards, forwards. We could, write books on it ourselves. We think about it so much. But the average person doesn't go at a piece of literature that way. They just want a good story.
Right.
And they want it to flow easily to where the book thinks for them at some places. And that's kind of what I've really focused on, being able to hit both audiences, which is a difficult thing to do when writing. And, I'm not going to pat myself on the back, but I think I've done it very well, where, if you just want a good read, this book's going to be just a fun read, just like kind of like picking up a children's comic, and you just read through the foot, and it's like so exciting, and you don't have to think much, but yet there's a whole other side of this that's underlying that is very in depth.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think my book does this more than most fantasy books that I've read, and I have a library full of fantasy books. I've been reading since since I was a young kid, and my teachers even went to my dad at one point and complained to my dad's like, "Oh, your son is just reading books through all of our classes," and I continued doing that through college. I never even bought a book in college and graduated. Listening to the things, but by reading all these books and everything, it kind of taught me what good fantasy is and what's bad fantasy, what made me bored or what excited me. So I've took that in mind. But in the end, my goal is to just tell a really good story. So you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I do.
So many people miss that.
But so what is kind of like the overall story?
The overall
is it a coming of age? Is it?
Well, it's kind of all of those things. There's three main characters.
Yeah.
And the three main characters have the coming of age. There's the young character named Bryn. Mm-hmm. And the story, you're actually thrown right into the middle of action. Okay. So it's kind of like, it's just, it doesn't start off with this big long backstory, and I may put like a prologue into it, like a synopsis at it. I'm not for sure exactly. But I kind of like the idea also that you're just thrown into the action. So you're actually thrown in, and Bryn is in this situation. Mm-hmm. And Bryn is a young boy. He's training to be what's called in the books the Ravenhawks, which is Attera's version of what you would consider rangers or scouts. Yeah. So they're called Ravenhawk Scouts, and I don't use the word ranger too much because it just too much ties with Tolkien, Dungeons and Dragons, and all this stuff. So I created kind of my own classes too. Sure, yeah. But I use words like scout. You think of like the Native American scouts, that the early Old West, and you think of scouting. So I use different words that are familiar. But anyway, so Bryn is a Ravenhawk Scout apprentice. Yeah. And he's an orphan. And, he's the whole, like you said, coming of age, and he's thrown right into a situation that is like a skilled fighter warrior would have trouble getting out of. Mm-hmm. And his traveling companions who brought him along one is Joshin, who is from his same tribe, which are the Medjans. And the Medjans, from my own cultural experiences, are kind of a mixture. If you imagine like the Cherokee Native Americans, which I spent a lot of time on the reservation, and of course my own group, the Sephardic Jews. I kind of mixed these people and created a whole culture. Okay. And when you see that, you'll see similarities, but it's not like these are a bunch of Indians running around or Native Americans, or these are a bunch of Jews running around. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so Bryn and Joshin are from these tribes, and they're on a mission, and that's where you're thrown right in the middle of a mission, and they're actually setting a trap. And they're trying to catch like a small raiding party, a horde of quote-unquote monsters, whatever you want to call them, goblins, ghouls. And I don't give too much of the story away.
Oh, yeah.
And so you're thrown right in the middle of that. And the book initially revolves around Bryn and Joshin, which Joshin is 500 years old. The Medjans live to be around 500, so he's already passed the 500-year mark and still going and adventuring, and he's kind of like a living legendary hero in Attera. And his companion is what's called an Inebri. Inebri are originally not from Attera. Okay. They actually escaped their dying world, and which is called Helenodon. Mm-hmm. And they left Helenodon, and what happened in Helenodon was basically your quote-unquote devil, antichrist type figure basically went to war with the good folk of Helenodon and pretty much destroyed the planet. As the planet was destructing, it's kind of like Kryptonite, Krypton and Superman.
Is there interplanetary travel in your...
Well, they opened a gate, a portal, and they escaped their dying world, and with them they took as many people they could of the Inebri. Yeah. They took creatures and animals that are only found, like griffins, are only found in Inebri, speaking animals, and they're actually called kinfolk animals. And they brought them with them to Attera, and so one of Joshin and Bryn's companions is an Inebri from that, and he's kind of like a bard sage character. He sings, just like a bard's, and the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah.
He's kind of like that, but his power comes from like a cleric, directly from God.
Yeah.
So as he sings, he channels the power from the All Creator Yael, and the Inebri are pretty much what, if you want a comparison, they're pretty much like elves.
Mm-hmm.
They have pointed ears and light features and all of that. So I wanted to keep demi-humans within the fantasy world.
Yeah.
But I don't directly use the
elves and dwarves.
Well, I have dwarves.
Okay.
But they're not called dwarves, only that's a bad slang to call them. It's actually the gnomes.
Okay.
And I went back to really what gnomes were, and according to like Viking mythology, the gnomes were actually the dwarves. There was no difference between. And so I used the word gnome, and there's two races of gnomes. Mm-hmm. There's the woodland gnomes, who deal with like technology, which sounds funny, they're woodland, but they like to make things. They deal with chemistry, and they're like hoarders of information and histories. And then you have the mountain gnomes, which are more like the classical Tolkien
dwarf, and
So if you call them that in Attera, you're gonna get your eye punched out. Yeah. So the mountain gnomes are tough and rugged and fighters and smiths, just like so I'm able to use that, but yet go away a little bit from
right. But that's kind of that keeping it familiar.
You have to,
yeah.
And there are creatures that I completely created from scratch that work very well in the world, and how you'll see how I use magic and wizardry is completely different in this world. There are no good wizards in this world. There are no good magic users. All wizards and magic users in this world actually channel Shadim, which is actually from an old Hebrew word meaning demon.
Okay.
So all magic comes from channeling demon spirits. And so all good people that would be quote unquote wizard aren't called wizard, they're called sages. Yeah. And their power comes from drawing energy.
Divine magic?
Divine. From the All Creator, which Yael. So what's interesting too, if you speak Hebrew, German, Chinese, you'll catch a lot of words that I use from different cultures and unique ways, and so and I think too this is really what's really going to be good. Let's say you're from a Chinese culture. Well, there's like a Chinese culture within Attera, and it's called Jingome, which represents China, Korea, and Japan, and then there's other islands representing different peoples and the Polynesians and Asians of Southeast Asia. So I started doing this, and I'd done it for a while, and I was a big Conan fan, but I never realized until one day I looked at a map, and the Howard, who created Conan, had done the same thing. Yeah. He took, like, Asian culture and put it within his world, called it something different.
So like everybody was kind of represented.
Yeah, so everybody's represented. And that's what I've done in Attera, because I want people to have that familiarity when you go into Attera, because if you just go into something really alien and weird, well, it's going to be alien and weird.
It's hard to relate to.
You're going to be like, I don't know about this.
And you spent a lot of time building this world. I mean, you said you started like 25. So do you have, is this like one book of a series?
Yes.
Is it going to be?
Well, as of right now, the main story going from A to Z is going to be probably 4 books. And the first book is probably going to be about 160,000 words. Okay. And 160,000 words is, to give you a reference. I keep on referencing Tolkien because everybody knows that. And it's about like reading the Fellowship of the Ring, the first book, and half the Two Towers. That's my first book. Okay. So it's a pretty thick book. Right. But it's not a hard read.
So do you feel it's kind of geared towards like young adults or
both?
Both.
So that's another thing I've thought too. I'm like, so what is my audience? And again, like I've tried to like, okay, I want like teens to pick this up and read it and enjoy it. Yeah. And then I want like old fantasy connoisseurs like myself to pick it up and just really
Thanks for not calling me old. Just left me out entirely. I'm okay with that.
So. And know this too, I'm not purposely doing all that to make it mainstream and sell books. What I'm doing that is for, the purpose why I'm doing that is so I want people to see what I've seen. I want people to see what's been building inside of me, and I want it to be able to relate it in ways that they understand it very well. That's why something we're doing in this book, I don't know, did you ever read the Silmarillion?
No,
for reference.
no, I've never.
I'll give you an example.
I know of it.
I'll give you an example. It's kind of like reading the Hebrew Torah, the Old Testament, and not knowing anything about Hebrew or the Bible, and trying to read all these names and genealogies and things, and you're just completely lost in 2 seconds. Like, who and what to get this person and that person to get this person. They went to the land of this and went there and what, and you're like, what is all that?
Right.
Well, what I've done in the Attera is it's actually a self-annotating book. There's a character in the book. His name is Tinkmut Badaboos, and he's a gnome. And so Tinkmut was given this work that his mentor, Robnob, was working on. And it's actually it's this encyclopedia and gazetteer of Attera. So this character has this book, and where he goes, he adds journal entries, writes things, because he's recording the vast plants and creatures and cultures and everything he comes across. He's just trying to
He's got like the Hitchhiker's Guide.
The Hitchhiker's Guide to Attera. Pretty much. I think that's a good word for it. So when you read the book, this is something I thought about. I'm like, this will not take away from the story at all. It reads just like a novel, but there are places on the side that are self-annotating. So it's Tinkmut's.
So like
Tinkmut's excerpts from his. Yeah. And one day I'll release that encyclopedia.
That'd be cool.
So I think that'd be something like after you read the books, everybody would be wanting to see that. So but there'll be excerpts from that encyclopedia on the side, so you can see what one of these creatures looks like. If it's again not something familiar to common populace.
And that makes, now that you explain it,
makes it a lot more
me
fun.
think really a lot of. Did you ever watch the British TV version of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
I think I actually did, and that again was like a long time ago.
Yeah, because a lot of it is the actors are going on, and then it will kind of cut. There's voiceover that's the guide speaking, and there's like pictures of whatever they're describing.
Well, this does that, and it will like things that you need to know without, because I don't like this. I don't like having to force dialogue or circumstances within a story just so I can explain something out to you. It really takes away from the flow of the story, and you see a lot of fantasy authors forced to do that. So instead of doing that,
stories in general.
So instead of doing that, I keep it flowing, and if you choose to, you hop over and just look. Yeah. Oh, read. That's what that is, and you jump back over. And I think it adds excitement, but and interest. But what it also does is, because when you're reading, you take mental breaks. Reading, you stop, like you read, and like there's a description of a valley and a battle that happened in that valley or whatever, and then you take a mental break while you're reading, and you sit and imagine what you just read and let that flow through, and then you go back into the reading. So so your mental pictures and images and the feelings and the sensations are catching up with what you're reading. I think everybody does that naturally.
Yeah.
When you're reading, so while you're doing that in this book, you take that break. The break is, let's look at what Tinkmut wrote over here in his that's connected to where we're reading here, and just all pieces together. And the reason I did that is, as I mentioned earlier, and I just pulled something very Brian Hallish there. I went all the way around the world to say something. But so I was talking to Silmarillion. I had that problem when I was reading the Silmarillion, and so many people that I've introduced the book to, they're like, are you crazy reading this? There were so many names and places and stories, and said I had to keep flipping to the back of the book and the glossary and all this stuff
to figure out what.
And it's annoying. And to be honest with you, I'm a veteran reader, and a very well educated, and I had difficulty reading the Silmarillion. It took me like 2 or 3 times reading it where I actually enjoyed it. Yeah. And I don't want people to do that with Attera. And of course, Attera isn't written in the same style as the Silmarillion, which is very archaically, biblically written. So, but I still don't want people to have to struggle, and because it's frustrating. Like, what's that mean? Or what's that? And it takes you out of. It's kind of like being in a movie theater, right? And somebody beside you starts talking about something they did that week or something at work, and it takes you out of the story, out of that, because you suspend your reality when you're watching, and you are in that movie. That's what makes it good. So I don't want reality suspended when you're reading the book. So when you go to Tinkmut's annotation, you're still within that world, and you're thinking about Tinkmut, and like, wow, this is in his journal. I'm getting a little clip here to see, this is helping me understand what's happening.
Right. So listening to you...
So it's like a storyteller within a storyteller.
Yeah. So listening to you describe a story and knowing you a little bit, I can't help but notice references to Dungeons and Dragons and whatnot. So I know, we've discussed playing a lot. Yeah. Do you feel that influence the story? Did you ever try and take part of it and make it a campaign, or?
Well, obviously, I've done a lot of RPG role-playing and stuff and enjoy gaming. And I would have to say that the dynamics of strategic fantasy role-playing, that, like the complexity of battles, when you read my book, you're going to see that complexity come through. And not in a way that it's complex and not enjoyable, but it's like a way that's like, wow, this is really cool. How it's almost like watching a movie scene.
Yeah.
And so I'm a very visual person, so I wanted to write visually. So as you're reading this, you'll see the scenes very well, and especially like the fighting.
Yeah.
I've just released one martial art book. I don't know how many months ago it's been, and we're going to do another martial art book.
What's the name of the book?
That is Foundations for Nine Gates Boxing. And I've been doing martial arts for 39 years. Mm-hmm. And I've studied, several types. And I was actually, in 1993, I was a heavyweight champion in the United States. So I've done extensive martial art training. I've trained special forces, police, and stuff. So I wanted to put that into the book as well in a way that you enjoy the fight scene. It's not just like he pulled his sword and fought like a, fought like a hero and, was valiant and strong and all this stuff and beat the goblin and chop his head off. I wanted to actually explain out fighting details.
Yeah.
To where it's like you actually will learn something about fighting reading this book and how real combat happens, because myself I've trained full contact fighters, I've trained MMA fighters, grapplers, so I know how fights work out, and I've trained weapons fighting. So you'll see that, I think, done very well in the book.
So it's got that sense of realism to the...
Yeah. And something else, too, I studied psychology in college, and of course, I got a rabbinical degree. And a rabbinical degree for a layman is basically like a doctorate in theology and divinities and basically like philosophical thought. So within the book, you don't just see actions of characters.
Yeah. And
then you interpret, well, I think he did this because that, and you have, I really, like I said, there's something happening that's real to me in Attera, and this is my own personal preference, I don't like a lot of loose interpretation.
So you want it to be very clear.
And so you get inside of these characters' heads.
Yeah.
And it's in ways that you realize what they're dealing with, what their weaknesses are, what they're thinking, and then the surprises come and how they act with that. Mm-hmm. And you can, and in that way, one of these characters, in a sense, in some ways, the three main characters are three different parts of me.
Yeah.
And like the Bryn is kind of like my childhood and my coming of age time and all my memories of that. Joshin is kind of like me now, I guess. I'm an old martial art instructor, and I guess I think old school, and and then Lorander is kind of like my spiritual side, my merry side, the side that is that loves to laugh and breathe in life. And so I kind of split myself into three personalities, creating these characters. So when you read these characters are very real.
Yeah.
It's frightening. But I made sure I'd done it in a way that no one can read this and then psychologically pick me apart as well.
Yeah. You can pick it apart anyway.
You may be able to do that anyways.
So that's an interesting thing that you broke it into three parts, and you plan on writing more. And I'm sure you have a rough idea of where this book is going to go. And I don't know if our listeners can hear, but there is a little guy on the other end of the table here that's making a little bit of noise. Do you feel now this is going to change your perspective on the book? Is Judah going to kind of somehow appear?
Maybe, I don't know, but I'll be honest with you. A lot of the characters are real people that I know very well.
I'm sorry, I didn't explain that too well. For our listeners, Judah is 3 months, you said?
Yes.
So congratulations,
of
course.
You.
And,
but, that's a really good point, again.
Because, I'm sure you had the idea of where your story was going to go, and now... There
have been things that have changed over the years as different things that I've experienced myself and learned, because, if you're not dying and you're living, as I say, that you're always growing. And if you're always growing, it means you're always learning new things. And and you kept your eyes open, your ears open, and taking in new information and broadening horizons. And as that happens, as we evolve as people, I think our literature, what we're writing evolves, and in ways it has to kind of where we feel comfortable with it. And that's something too. Like I wrote these stories, and just me as a person, where I'm at in my life, I couldn't have wrote at this level any time before. And I'm 43 years old, and everybody's like, oh, you should have wrote that book, because people have read excerpts, and
well, I always feel it's like one of those things that
you can't do it until it's the right time for each person.
Exactly, and like I've had ideas and things that sometimes you work on it, sometimes it sits dormant, and it kind of comes to fruition when it's time.
Well, and I have, I've been a very busy person. I have a lot of irons in the fire. At one point was teaching.
Like?
We're all that way. I was running different organizations and working full time, teaching martial arts, teaching languages, doing all kinds of different things. I play music, and I have all these things that I enjoy doing. And I still, in the back of my mind, this book always evolved. I would write on it at times. I would write poetry. I have whole poems written within this world. I created languages for this world. But like I said, they've all changed and evolved as I have. But I guess, if I would have written this, like I said, years before, it just wouldn't have been right, I don't think. I think now I'm at that point. And something else too, during that time period, I've was never happy with my writing, meaning that I was like, I enjoy doing this. It's something I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about storytelling, but I just didn't like my writing. I was just like, I'm very,
I think everybody's the most judgmental of their own work.
And I was that way in martial arts. I was that way in music, and I would never put something in public unless it was, to me, perfect. Like, it was just exactly how I wanted to be, and I was very, almost too critical of myself. And what happened was, I started letting some of my martial arts students read a few chapters, and the person that became the editor, I let the editor read it, and they were like, you need to publish this and finish this into a book. They were really just amazed at the stories, and I was like, well, story writing is kind of, probably my biggest passion. I just never did it. I was always doing other things, and so I've had a lot of positive feedback, and it's just kind of like all the fates lined up, and finally all my dominoes were in a row, and everything just started going down, and here we are now. I'm writing it all out cohesively to put it into a book.
We've known each other, we figured close to 10 years, I think.
Maybe longer.
It might be longer, and
we're going to guesstimate.
Yeah, we'll say 10 years just to round it off. And we've always had conversations that you've been talking about writing a story and working on things. And
I think I was working on that first martial art book when we first met.
Yeah, I think so.
I even delayed publishing that, and there was another one that we were going to a publisher and stuff. But
I remember you telling me you were working on some sort of martial arts book that was a Ring Dagger or something.
Yeah, at that point, we never published that book either. We ended up publishing a different book. But yeah, I was doing the Ring Dagger book, which some people still want me to come out with that. But my real passion, I think, right now is writing this fantasy book. And to be honest with you, it's kind of strange. You have to actually write really well. Is something I couldn't do before, because you have to really shut down a lot of areas of your life in a sense that would take your attention or draw your attention too much in one direction, because it pulls you out of the world. Then you have to go back into it and get absorbed, and it's hard to go back and forth.
Have you ever?
I've had to cut off a lot of things.
Have you ever heard of Johnny Cupcakes?
No.
It's a clothing line, and it's the guy who runs it is from Braintree, Weymouth, maybe. His name's Johnny Earl, and one of the best advice that I heard him ever give was, if you have this thing that you want to do, then be boring. Your friends are going out, you're working on your thing. Your friends are going to the movie, you're working on your thing. He's like, you're going to be boring. if you really
Well,
want to commit to that thing, you have to commit.
I've
to it.
definitely fell into that boring hole and staying there. And I have to until I get all these books done. And I did the same thing when I was competing in martial arts. You know, I actually would train 5 hours a day. That sounds crazy, I know.
Yeah.
But I had to become a monk, and that's what my friends called me, the monk. And they're like, dude, you just went crazy. You know, they're out going places and hanging out, going to the lake swimming or you know, out skateboarding. And here I am hitting the bag and training, you know, martial arts by myself, and you know, I mean, it paid off too.
Yeah,
that's how
dedication.
That's how I was, you know, I was able to compete on the international level and actually have students. So, you know, had 14 medalists internationally that I've trained, and it took basically that isolation, and and the fantasy book's even worse in some ways because, you know, it's all in your mind, it's all in your head. It's kind of like astrophysics.
Yeah.
You know, and the funny thing is, I actually studied, you know, in college some cosmological physics, and really got interested and read a lot of Hawking. You know, studied Einstein's theory of relativity, just, you know, a lot of things about the universe. And there's so much of physics is mathematics, but then there's a whole other branch of physics that's all theoretical.
Theoretical, right.
And because you can't measure and judge if there's a black hole, unless you actually can go measure and judge a black hole with your five senses, or using part of your five senses. And there's so many things within that, it's all in your head. And I guess it's the same thing with the fantasy, you know, world. You know, it's all a whole world that's forming in your head. And I guess that's the reason Isaac Asimov. I mean, a lot of people, if you've never read Isaac Asimov and you're listening to this, you need to go read some of his books. They're very interesting. But a lot of people don't know this about Asimov. Asimov was a brilliant physicist. He was also a genius writer. He wrote I, Robot, which they made a movie out of, and he wrote The Foundation and all that. But something that a lot of people don't know, NASA used one of his theories and actually proved that it worked. It's called a slingshot. Did you know about this?
No.
He designed the slingshot theory, basically a satellite. If you take a rocket or satellite and you want to get it out into deep space across the solar system,
go around the orbit.
so you go into the gravitational pull, just like Einstein talked about what gravitational fields were. You know, like he showed it.
How Kirk went back in time.
Yeah. So they use a slingshot that you develop. You know, getting the speed from the gravity pull, and you jump out of the gravity well, and it gives you all this, you know, exponential amount of force. And for him to imagine all that in his head, and then it become a reality on something that large a scale, you know, I think that's the art of really good writing in fantasy, is that this has to be real somewhere. Meaning that when I'm writing this, like, there are times I'm like almost in tears.
Yeah.
And I'm like, something's happening to a character. To me, it's really happening. And you know, I get whatever I'm writing, I'm feeling those emotions because I'm so deep into it. And I guess
I remember hearing similar stories about J.K. Rowling with the last Harry Potter book, and, you know, people writing her letters because people were convinced she was going to kill off Harry, and she said, she said, she was brought to tears and she didn't know what to do, and it was a struggle because, I mean, you spend so much time with this character and trying to figure out who they are and flesh them out that they do kind of become real to you. Yeah,
and I think that happened. I read, I'm sure you probably read this too, the Dragonlance series.
No, I never actually read it.
Tracy.
I know of them.
I think Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss co-wrote those. Am I right?
Our research department says yes.
Okay, our research department said yes. I didn't fumble over that and use some bad information. But anyways, when they were writing the Dragonlance series, there's a character. Oh God, this is a spoiler, so just turn your ears off if you haven't read this. But there's a main character that they killed off. I'm gonna mention his name, so I won't be spoiled too bad. I caught myself. Yeah. And but you should have read these by now.
They come out a long time ago.
They're like 30 years ago. You should have read it by now.
I don't think you have to worry about spoilers.
But they killed off one of the main characters, and there were several actually got killed off, so they were really killing it. But the first one that they killed off, they both cried.
Yeah.
And you know, I guess too, you know, I'm thinking you have to really have a good touch with reality to write your fantasy as well.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I can see how someone get lost and go crazy. You know, and it happens in actors.
Oh, sure, yeah.
The Joker role.
Yep.
Jack Nicholson called. You're saying it right now. Jack Nicholson called Heath Ledger and said, "Look, Heath, watch it when you're playing this character. You're going to get lost, and you're going to lose yourself. And be very careful. It's dangerous what can happen psychologically." And I think that's kind of what led to him, taking a lot of pain medicine and doping himself up and dying. But anyway, that's
but even like we brought up D&D. We watch there's a D&D show called Critical Role, and they've been playing these characters for 2 years, and they, every week spend 3 hours on their character, and when that character dies or comes very close to death, it's pretty real. That character spent a lot of time as part of that person's life, and it sounds ridiculous to people who haven't experienced it, but if you spend that much time with a character, it can you feel some real loss.
Absolutely. And again, it's that you have to really believe in what you're doing too when you're writing. And something like this fantasy world, to me, it's just like I take trips there every time I write, and I'm right there. I'm seeing everything, and then I have to exit out of that world when I'm not writing. And that's what I'm saying. Once I exit out of that world and I'm in the real world here, I kind of got to watch how much information I take in, how many things I get involved with that will draw my mind too much, because I'm very OCD in some ways. I get very you have to be obsessive somewhat to be good at something.
Sure. Yeah.
And if you look at people that have excelled, give an example, Rodney Mullen, and I bring this up because I'm an old skateboarder. Rodney Mullen is probably every skateboarding trick that you could watch on YouTube that's amazing. Rodney Mullen created it.
Yeah.
The guy's amazing.
Was he one of the Bones Brigade?
Yeah, he was original. Yeah,
I remember.
Yeah, Stacy Peralta had recruited him, and Rodney Mullen is, he's kind of like mild Asperger's.
Right. Yeah, and he was very much the guy who did street tricks,
and he just took it to another level.
Yeah,
and there's nobody. He's the best skater ever, but he was obsessed.
Yeah,
like. The Bones Brigade would go travel somewhere.
And he would disappear.
He'd disappear. Yeah. They're like eating burgers. He's like, "Where's Rodney?" And he's out skating by himself.
4 hours.
And he's a genius.
Yeah.
On top of it. If you heard, I think he was on TED Talk once. And he was a genius how he would explain how he would come up with new tricks and everything. And, you have to have that little bit of craziness to where you can become obsessed with something to be good enough. And I think I in some ways fit that category just a little bit, because I started out in stories with my grandmother telling me folklore and legends. I remember my dad reading me Robin Hood and things as a kid, and I always liked myth, legends, and folklore, religions, whatever, anything like that. It just was within the narrative of storytelling I just loved. And so, growing up, as early as I could read, I started reading. Because people have been reading to me, and they instilled that quote unquote lust for books. And I remember being in the 3rd grade, and we had a pretty big library at the grade school I went to, which was in Martin, Kentucky. I transferred from Indiana, where I grew up.
I'm sorry, where'd you grow up again?
Indiana.
I always want to say you're from Tennessee, but you're not.
Tennessee, no, not from Tennessee. From Kentucky.
Kentucky.
But I actually was born in
right.
Indiana. Shout out to everybody in Middletown watching this. And Middletown, Indiana is where I grew up.
That's where our largest audience is.
Really?
No.
Oh, okay. So there's crickets on that one.
Yeah.
I know some people from there, so they'll probably listen. So
it'll soon be our largest audience.
Yeah. Okay, and so I moved to Kentucky, and and I remember in the 3rd grade, I just become obsessed with reading, and I think kind of what happened with me, I didn't know, like, I had a lot of different, I wouldn't say mental issues, but I had, like, psychological anomalies. I'm like borderline Asperger's, if you can't tell. And
that wasn't I can tell. I was just I realized you were like, oh yeah, no.
And as people close to me realize, I'm very savant-ish, meaning that I pick up an instrument. I play like 8 instruments. I play any instrument I want. Languages, all these things. I go through it, and I didn't know that about myself. I just thought I was different from everybody. And I guess everybody else thought I was different too. Made a little bit crazy. And so at 3rd grade, I remember being in 3rd grade. It's kind of like a pivotal point in my life. And I remember just having philosophical questions and wondering and guessing questions of the universe that most kids that age wouldn't even wonder or think about. And we're having some technical difficulties, so I'm about to start laughing. But anyways, so I started reading, and I read almost an entire library, all the fiction, mythology, and history books. And this is no exaggeration. And you got to imagine, I'm in the 3rd grade doing this.
No, I completely had my brain went left on this.
And you could test me at that time. I still can from reading at that time. I can name every Norse, Egyptian, Greek god, what they are, who they are, their Roman equivalents.
I'm just going to pose this question for you. This is completely a departure from what we're talking about. But you mentioned the library and how much that was an effect on you, and it's funny because, my library as a kid was a huge effect on me because I went to the library and I was obsessed with, they used to have these books called 50 ways, or 50, draw 50, and then each book was something different. Draw 50 circus characters, draw 50 buildings, draw 50 famous people.
And so that pulled you into the art.
Do you think, because it did, it absolutely did. That was, that and Captain Bob were the first memories of art that I had. And so, libraries are kind of going by the wayside. Do you think that's
really sad? But
do you think that's going to have a drastic effect, or do you think people are just going to find that inspiration from somewhere else?
I really don't know. And I will tell you this: the good thing about a library is that the books limit you to that book as you're reading it. And because it takes it's physical. You have to have the book and be on the page. You can't just click a button and have another book in front of you. Click another, have another book. Have 1,000 clicks and 1,000 books in front of you to skip all over it. And I think that's what's happening now, is that people have a little bit of information about everything. But the problem is they can't piece anything together for any real knowledge or information of how things work. It just gets what I said.
Yeah.
And I think we're losing that part of us in today's society.
Attention span.
Attention span is exactly what it goes into. And a little bit of knowledge is dangerous.
Yeah.
And because, you may know one piece of history, but not know the whole story behind it. And, you really get lost on a truth.
Yeah.
And yes, I'm one of those people who believe that there is absolute truths and absolute falsehoods. But anyways, I think that's the problem, that we lose our ability to think and reason with real information that we've built. Like, say, if you have an idea that you believe something, you have a whole case history behind that of things that you've sensed and information you've tucked in that brought you to that belief. And, for example, a painting style. You like a certain painting style. The reason you like that painting style is because you've experimented with others.
Right.
And then you've experimented with that painting style from the beginning and went all the way through, and you have all these experiences.
And even with those other ones that you experimented with, you still take little bits and kind of add them to that.
Yeah, and so the problem is when you haven't went through that step by step by step and seen everything, how it works together, you're just, it's kind of like, it's better to see a puzzle together and see how the pieces fit and work together. Then you understand what each piece really means by itself. But if you can't see the big picture and you just have one piece of some kind of weird odd colors, your mind and imagination can make that into anything.
Right.
And that's, again, what I didn't want to happen in my book when I'm writing, is that, I'm going to get to the artists, which I think you're mentioning art. I was very picky about, trying to find someone that could get inside my head when they're doing art and everything. And
that's an exceptionally hard thing.
It's very hard. And John Kutzers, who's doing art with this, is, he's a very intelligent person, very, again, well-read, and has a very unique way of looking at things. And so when we started working, I would, send him ideas of a character, explain, what I thought the character's personality was, what their look was, what their clothing looked like, how they fought, all these different parameters of what would make a character, what you would need to have a fleshed out character. And John just kept producing exactly what I was seeing. And it almost scared me. It's kind of like, okay, now fate is really working with this book. and it was just exactly what I was looking for. And his art, this is one thing too. His art actually plays a big part of my book, even though I've written it for 25 years without knowing him. And what I mean by that is that, I said this, and I was like, well, this is one of the first times that I know of, and I'm sure it's happened somewhere, but not in mainstream fantasy books, where you have an artist and an author, and it's not a graphic novel.
Yeah.
Have an artist and an author work so close together. Because if you look at like fantasy
a lot
books,
of times like that, you have the book done.
Yeah. And then can you come do an oil painting, and that's it.
Yep. Yeah.
John, we actually have profile pictures of each character. And even the monsters within this world, and the races, and some of the places. And so I would explain that. That way I wanted them fleshed out for myself too. Right. So when I go back, and I'm a self-editor. I edited, I'd write my book. I'd write a whole 50 pages, and I go back and edit it 5 times before I hand it to the editor. Right. And so I would go back, and his, like being able to flesh the characters out would help me edit better and explaining in details and, giving some wordology, graphic examples of things. But, it's just, I think this is what's unique about the book, is that we're going to release all these character pictures within the book. And, of course, we'll have prints to follow the book along when you buy the book. And that way, people see what I'm seeing. And someone's like, well, doesn't that take away from the imagination of a book? And the person that said that was actually a comic artist. I'm like, well, isn't that what you do? Like, as a comic artist, like, you show us what Spider-Man looks like, and, like the guy that created the black costume, Zach. Yeah. And drew that we knew what the black costume looked like. Yeah. It wasn't like you were reading it. And so I wanted to kind of have that deep explanation and that power of the novel, but yet have character portraits and illustrations where you're seeing what I'm seeing really clearly. Yeah. And I think it's going to be very enjoyable when people read a book like this, and it's not going to take away from your imagination. It actually kind of strengthens your imagination. This is what I'm talking about. It's kind of like I'm giving you the colors and the brush and to paint with as you're seeing things, instead of just like giving you a blank canvas with no colors and no brush, and like, it's just kind of like, well, this may mean this, and you may want to go this and that way. It's kind of like I want to make a clear map visually of what things look like.
Well, you clearly want to get across exactly what you're seeing.
Yeah, and because my problem is too, I was in college, I don't know how many different majors I had, but at one point I was an art major, and believe it or not. And one thing bothered me, that the art school I was at had went so far into abstract and surrealism, and we would sit in classes and look at art pieces, and if you had 50 people in that class, you'd have 50 different interpretations. Oh, yes. Well, definitely. I'm like, well, that's beautiful that we can all think and get all these ideas, but the problem is, who knows now what the heck the artist meant? Right. I want to know who this artist is. I want to know what he meant in this. There's something specific he's trying to tell me.
And there's very different schools of thought on that. Yeah. And as far as stories, I think it really depends on the story. Like, one of my favorite things about Pulp Fiction is you don't really ever know what's in the briefcase, and everyone has their own interpretation. It might be this, it might be that. Some people are like, no, it's this, and some people are like, no, it's that. But for that story, it works. Yeah.
Yeah, and why it works is because the briefcase really is just a small element backdrop
to the whole story
of the main driving story. And and I think you do have to have those elements of mystery. And there is things in this book that did you ever read A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare?
I did not.
And I think I remember reading that years ago. That was one of the first stories that I really was intrigued with, because there was like 3 different storylines going on at once that intermingled. My book really pulls a lot of Midsummer Night's Dreams ideas that way, the way Shakespeare. There's a lot of things happening. You don't know why they're happening. Yeah. And you find out later why, in interesting ways, what built up to this and why this person did this. And there's a lot of things that's very prophetic in nature. And that comes from my own personal experiences. People that are around me know this about me. I am known to have a dream. I'll tell somebody exact details what I dreamed, and the exact event will happen within 2 days to them. And I've done that time and time and time again. And so my whole life has been kind of, spiritually prophetic that way. And I have elements of that in there where there's like these prophecy events and dreams and things that need to be interpreted and mean separate things. And then, there's a lot of the physical things too happening that you're exploring the world too.
Yeah.
I'm telling you in detail what it looks like, but I'm still allowing your imagination to me, I think it strengthens how deep you'll be able to see things, because you'll take what what this character looks like, you're able to take it and journey through this book and this story as the narrative flows with it as you're reading. And that's one of the things, like, I remember, I never separated as a kid. I really, like, all the things I read in novel forms and things, I always enjoyed when they're accompanied by pictures.
Yeah.
Because I'd always just stop and just stare at the illustration. And the illustrations would have just as much, drawing power as the words themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to keep that type of duality. Because some people are visual.
Yeah.
And if you're visual, you're going to enjoy my book. You're like, wow, this is very visual. And some people are just very non-visual. And everything has to be like, just processed information going through them by semantical words. And it's very much hits that too. So as you can see, I've struggled to keep that balance.
Get it right, yeah.
On all these different spectrums of writing. And one thing too that I learned, if you want to write a good fantasy novel, what makes it believable is when you have a very, we use this word a lot tonight, fleshed out history. You have a very complex history that has happened, and it's ancient, and it's archaic, and it permeates into the modern cult, I would say the here and now culture that you're reading, as the narrative goes. And so you see these characters talk about stories they've heard about, or things that they've seen, like old ruins that go back ages, and books they may come across themselves, books within books. I like doing that. That go back ages, and when you do that, it makes this world so real. And I think a lot of fantasy fails was when I don't want to brag. I hate ragging on stuff, but there's a lot of popular sci-fi movies that have failed because of really no poor background, a rushed background to throw into a story where you're sitting like, okay, this just looks like it just was born now.
Yeah,
I don't
and
feel
it
like
just seems like it's flat. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of thought put into it.
Yeah, it's just like, okay, this is like this world was born 2 seconds ago.
Yeah.
And now we're kind of just shimmying through it, and you want something that's rooted when you read it. That's the reason Tolkien is so good.
Are you referring to unobtainium?
Do you want me to put my reference out there?
No, I was just messing
Dune.
Oh,
okay. Thing I'm referring to, because
no, I was just thinking of
it's so complex, but yet it throws you in this world without just trying to figure out this complex history.
Just things like unobtainium that from
The Core.
Huh?
The Core?
No, unobtainium from the Blue People.
Oh, Avatar.
Avatar. Thank you, research department. It just seemed like such
Avatar. We're talking about Cameron's Avatar.
Yeah. It just seemed like such a let's just make something up on the fly.
And let's steal it from Fern Gully.
Oh, that whole story. Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
100%.
Well, here's something. This is a good example of good storytelling with the history. And he admitted it, thank God. And because I'm an Akira Kurosawa fan.
Yeah.
If you ever watched his movies, then you've really missed out on life. I think Akira Kurosawa was one of the greatest storytellers that ever lived. I mean, his movies, Rashomon, The Hidden Fortress, The Seven Samurai. I mean, how many times have those been repeated? I mean, The Magnificent Seven was done as a Western United States. Well, the Hidden Fortress was as well. A lot of people don't know this. That's where George Lucas got the storyline. You have an empire, you have a princess, you have a Ronin samurai, Han Solo. Yeah. And you have two farmers, which are C-3PO and R2-D2. And he just took the story and put it into a space opera. Yeah. But why Star Wars worked so well, and I got to jump back here. I really like the whole and it's not allegorical. The whole taking from Asian culture that he put into Star Wars.
Yeah.
I mean, like Darth Vader's helmet's like a samurai.
Oh, absolutely,
armor.
yeah.
The lightsaber is a samurai sword. The Force is how the Japanese believed in ki energy in their martial arts and stuff. And all those elements he put and just made it his own. And so then that way, subconsciously, it was familiar to us. Star Wars was.
Right, and that's kind of gets back to that same thing.
Yeah, it's familiar. As soon as you're in Star Wars, you're like, wow, I've always known this place, but yet it's new to me. And yet, when you got Luke Skywalker, the whole coming of age, the they're playing the music, he's looking at the twin sons, and but when he meets Obi-Wan, that's when that history just that Obi-Wan is the link to Star Wars past, and what made Lucas so good at it is that he already had all the story before that, or at least most of it. Not all of it. He went back and changed it.
Yes.
But we're saying he had...
Let's not talk about the prequel, shall we?
Yeah, we're not talking about the prequel. We're talking about he had enough of a backstory that it made it very real. I mean, Tatooine and being Obi-Wan saying, oh, this is what happened. And when you're watching those scenes, you feel like it's archaically old. It's like, it has this whole feel of, timelessness to it.
Yeah.
And again, I've took all that elements and put it into these books. So
again, Brian, I don't mean to cut you off there, but we are reaching the hour here, and so the book is
Legendary Kingdoms of Attera. That's the series. The first book is called The Lightstones, and I want to tell you what the Lightstones are. You've got to read them.
Don't give anything away. And we coming out Black Friday.
Yep.
And check your local comic book shop in Massachusetts, and I'm sure there'll be a website.
You can go to Facebook right now,
okay,
and you just type in Legendary Kingdoms of Attera, Attera, and you'll find the page, and just like the page, and you can follow all the news and stuff, because we're doing everything grassroots, so we're gonna have a website up for it eventually, and start announcing when I think our first. It's right after Black Friday, around that time. We're going to start, I think, as far as I know, at Friendly Neighborhood Comics in
Bellingham,
Massachusetts.
Yep.
That's going to be like the Kickstarter for, I'm not doing a Kickstarter, by the way. I'm just saying it's the Kickstarter.
Just the kickoff.
It's the kickoff.
The sports reference thing.
Yeah, it's the kickoff for the book series.
It's the field goal punch.
I hope to be on tour and just working on getting the rest of the books and publication and all of that. So you can follow us on Facebook.
Excellent. And so just to do our normal plugs, we're here at the Craft Beer Cellar, and you can follow Inebri-art either on Facebook, or you can get us on Twitter at Inebri-art, which has recently changed, so that makes it a lot easier. And this will be up in time, hopefully. Our first annual art show will be October 8th at the Dirty Water Distillery. If you'd like to submit a piece of artwork, I don't know if this will be out in time, but no, probably not. So, well, most likely not. So,
what would you do without your tag guy?
What would I do with him? There would be no podcast. So Fish's research and tech and all producer and all that other stuff. So October 8th will be the art show, hopefully. And you can go to Facebook and see all the other events we're going on. And the Craft Beer Cellar has provided us with Maui Brewing Company Coconut Porter tonight, which is their tagline is like hot chicks on the beach. I'm not sure what that means, but it is what it is. And
can you like cold chicks on the beach?
I don't know. It's porter brewed with hand toasted coconut, and it's a 6% by volume alcohol. It's actually pretty tasty. So thanks for tuning in, Brian. Thanks for coming down.
Thanks for having me.
Yep, and thanks for bringing your little guy.
Yep.
He's adorable. And we'll have to get him on the podcast at some point when he wants to talk.
If he's like me, he's going to have a lot to say.
Yeah, we'll definitely have you back after the book comes out, and we can talk. We'll talk more D&D and nerd stuff.
Maybe some more nerd subtopics.
Of course.
Get off me going on about myself and my book.
Yeah, that's why we brought you on. But yeah, and we can always talk Captain America and stuff like that. So
Excellent.
it's always a pleasure.
I'm always ready for that.
And yeah, we'll have to get together and play D&D sometime.
Excellent. Sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.